Hi, everybody. It is good to see such a nice crowd here this afternoon, I guess it is now, for our coffee and conversations, the second one of our season. Of course, we have Noelle Mason. I'm going to introduce her in just a bit. But first of all, I wanted to thank some people. I want to thank all of you for being here. I appreciate you coming out during the day to engage even further with our art exhibitions. As Noelle is one of the artists in the group exhibition, we'll probably have a chance to actually walk out there together and check out some of the work too. I want to thank the Sterling Society, of course. Without them, this event series would not be happening. Alongside a whole lot of other stuff that happens here at the Arts Center, their support has been invaluable, and we love them, of course. And I want to thank all of our donors and the staff that helps put on this series on a regular basis. So I want to thank all of them. Of course, we are happy to have with us artist Noelle Mason. She has a piece in the Tempest Projects group exhibition. It could have been anything you wanted. Tempest Projects at 16. I have a brief bio I wanted to read about Noelle. She holds an MFA in sculpture from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a BA in Studio Art and Theater Performance from the University of California, Irvine. She is currently professor of sculpture and extended media and graduate MFA coordinator at the University of South Florida in Tampa. Noelle's work has been widely exhibited and recognized internationally. For example, her solo exhibition series, X-Ray Vision versus Invisibility, has shown in venues including the Benaki Museum of Art in Sarasota and the Florida Museum of Photographic Arts in Tampa. It explores surveillance, borders, and the hidden systems by which we are viewed and managed. In addition to her studio practice, Noelle has been honored with numerous awards and fellowships, including the Florida Prize in Contemporary Art People's Choice Award in 2016. I didn't know about that one. And the Lens Culture Art Photography Award first place. So today we're delighted to have her along with us. Oh my goodness, I worked so hard to get this whole thing started. I realized I completely forgot my questions. Yeah, but I think I can go ahead just from memory and from curiosity. So first of all, I wanted to ask you a bit. You are a professor of sculpture and extended
media.
Extended media.
Yeah.
So if you can explain to us what extended media involves.
We didn't come up with that phrasing. I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's a fairly common phrasing for sculpture programs. So back in the 70s, there was a famous essay by the art historian named Rosalind Krauss, and the essay is called Sculpture in the Expanded Field. And it was trying to kind of figure out what was going on in the 70s with sculpture, or how we could think about practices that artists were doing that didn't look like traditional sculpture, right? Practices like land art, or things like ornamentic Clark's kind of incise cuts into buildings, or things that kind of really did push the boundaries of what sculpture looked like or meant. And so that is kind of where the sort of history of sculpture expanded into kind of meaning anything that wasn't painting and photography, and including performance art by artists like Chris Burden, famously did things like get shot in the arm, or live in a gallery for an entire month, or things like that, and called them sculpture. So sculpture became this thing that went beyond just objects in the room, but really engaged three-dimensional and four-dimensional space, including in the 90s. Like a big part of sculptural practice became installation art, right? Things that were essentially giant rooms that you might walk around in and that might interact with you in some way, or things like relational aesthetics, where people were cooking food for each other in the gallery. So this is sort of what's meant by sculpture and extended media, or what's meant to be captured by that terminology.
Okay, so my most sense.
So my classes that I teach I have a class, that I teach on performance art or on installation art. So including just traditional sculpture classes.
So I also wanted to, if you could tell us about how you became an artist, your path to becoming an artist. And one thing I didn't know about you is you had a BA in theater performance.
Correct.
How did that happen, and how does it also inform the way you make art now, if it does at all?
Yeah, it actually does quite a bit. So I grew up in Chula Vista, California, where she lived. Kathy, is it? Cassie. Also lived at some point, which is right on the border of Mexico, and it's right on the other side of Tijuana, essentially. So you know where Tijuana is. Most people do. Chula Vista is the California side. That area had a really, I was kind of introduced to art in high school. I had a really great teacher who he taught an AP art history class, and he also was an art collector and had a wide collection of art. He was kind of one of these guys that sort of a hermit, lived like in an apartment and just filled his apartment entirely with art, and it was sort of a boundless collection, and like included people like Paul Brill, who were like 16th century painters, all the way to pop art, contemporary art. So and Rauschenberg in his collection. I mean, it was like an early adopter of people, so he would get things before they were. That was very uncommon in Southern California. Let's just say, you might expect to see something like that in New York, but so that really introduced me to. His interest in contemporary art really introduced me to contemporary art and gave me an appreciation for it. As well as I was really interested in this experimental music scene that was going on in Southern California, which there isn't much of an art scene in San Diego, but there is a really great history of experimental music. And so it often engaged things like crazy performances where the person on stage would like run around the audience with duct tape and like duct tape it together. So when I went to college, I was very interested in these sort of more radical kinds of forms, and I got fortunate enough to I originally went to Parsons, did my first year at Parsons, ran out of money in New York, came back to California, went to community college where I encountered a guy who studied under Grotowski, who was one of the developers of theater cruelty, along with Antoine Artaud. And so there's a whole Grotowski method, and it's very physical, and he would like get his actors up in the middle of the night and run them several miles and then make them rehearse for like 8 hours. So it was like ego death was like the goal, right? So very 1970s, And so I was fortunate to study at community college under him, and it really got me interested in physical theater. And so then I went to UC Irvine, where Grotowski had been a professor, and kind of continued my education in physical theater there. And then when I got to graduation, I was like looking at what stood in front of me in terms of theater, and like everyone I knew was going to Hollywood, and I was like, well, I don't want to do that at all. Like, I'm not interested in being on camera, or like I'm interested in live experiences. And so I jumped back into art and took all those credits I'd done at Parsons and realized I only had to do one more year to get an art degree. So did that predominantly in sculpture. So because that's where you can do performance art and it counts. So that got me into the Art Institute of Chicago for grad school, and I just kind of continued there, doing works that were both performance-based as well as, and they were really like performance sculptures, performance installations. So like the body was sometimes used inertly, or sometimes used in durational practices, or in ways that were kind of nonverbal, usually non-narrative. And that kind of sense around sculpture as like something which exists in time, which exists in a place where when you enter a space, it starts a kind of narrative, right? Or kind of time-based experience for the viewer as they're walking around the space. Totally informs, it's just like another object in space, is like a performer in that space. So
kind of along those lines, how your work is very unique and diverse, looking at the whole body of work. How would you describe it to someone that is unfamiliar with it, and maybe even would you describe to somebody who's unfamiliar, say, with contemporary art in general?
Yeah, it's always a bit of a challenge. It always happens at the worst times. Like trying to I don't know, have a drink at a bar or something. What do you do? And I'm like, teaching at university. Trying to get my way out of that. Because the next thing I know, it's like 3 hours later, and I'm trying to explain what contemporary sculpture is. I work multi-disciplinary, or in different mediums. I work medium specifically, so I choose the medium depending on what I feel like is going to be the most effective and has historically. I'm very interested in mediums that have a kind of history to them that affects the kind of meaning of the work itself. One thing that I'm very interested in is I don't believe in medium transparency. Like I think that the medium should announce itself as such. And because of that, I have a problem with photography, because I think photography is like the worst offender of pretending to be transparent, right? So a lot of my work is about my kind of mistrust of photography and the way in which I think it should announce its medium specificity and should announce its the way it is aesthetically formed for specific effects, right? So a lot of the things that technologies that I'm looking at are like surveillance technologies, a lot of those are machine vision technologies used to surveil. And there's this idea that somehow the aesthetics are like a given in that technology, or that they're somehow like objective, right? And they're very much constructed. Like the images that are made by those technologies are somebody decided to make them look like that in a certain way, right? Like these are historically bound aesthetic choices that were made, and often for reasons which affect us as viewers in ways that can have dehumanizing effects for people, or can have, right? So
we'll take a look at some examples. We might need to bring you back to talk about AI, though.
Happy to.
See, so this is the piece that's actually in the exhibition right now. It's hard to tell from this image that it's a cotton cross stitch, but the image itself is probably very familiar to a lot of us. I mentioned to you that
still the people who weren't alive at that time, which I think is interesting, because a lot of the things that some of the source material I've used, people Gen Z don't know about, right?
I have to explain it to my daughter, but I was a junior in high school when this happened, so it does kind of hit hard when I first saw it. Because the image, of course, is from the security images of the Columbine shooting, and a lot of the work seems to do this, where it will take an image such as this surveillance image and translate it into craft, which is cross stitch. Whenever we translate something, literally speaking, from one language to another, there's always something, it seems like there's something lost and then there's something gained sometimes. When you translate this imagery that we know so well into, say, the cross stitch, for example, or we'll show some other examples later, what do you kind of hope is lost or gained when you take this out of, say, an image on a computer and spend time making a cross stitch out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that, the title is a little mysterious in a certain way. The title, which is Nothing Much Happened Today, is actually a reference to, and it's quite obscure, but a apocryphal story, so it's not even true, about George III, that the only thing that he wrote in his journal the day the Revolutionary War started was nothing of interest happened today, or something like that. Let's change it to nothing much happened today. So this idea that there is like a period of time where something as kind of earth-shattering as the Revolutionary War beginning would have gone unnoticed for months, right? In the time of George III. It would take
somebody traveling across to bring the news, right? So across the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm a West Coaster, sorry. So the title kind of references this sort of idea that is this encounter distinction to like the way we experience events like this now, which is that an image like this is taken and then plastered all over the media. Now fractions of a second after it happened, right? At this time, this still took, maybe 30 minutes, or longer, right? And that seems like ages now. So one of the things about taking this and changing or remediating it or translating it into counter cross stitch is that this is a medium that is not it being handmade is incredibly labor intensive and takes a very long time versus like the amount of time that this image took to take, which is like 1/30th of a second of a frame of a surveillance camera image, and that 35th second is denoted there, right? So it's like the time code kind of tells us when that fraction of a second was, but then the making of it into this cross stitch kind of is a sort of absurdist act of taking that and expanding it into this very long construction of this image that was originally it's very quickly made. And part of that purpose for me is to have people think about the construction of these images, that they are constructed, right? That the angle is constructed, the image is chosen, it's selected from this, stream of thousands and thousands of potential images that could have been selected. This one was chosen and then became this iconic image, and it's chosen not objectively, but by subjects who have a particular motive behind, trying to say something with this image. Which, surveillance imagery is kind of the last bastion in the 90s of photography's like truthiness, you know what I mean? Because at the time we didn't have the technology to easily alter video.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's definitely changed is we kind of go through images in our lives much faster than we used to. And so I was thinking, it's kind of reflective, why did this piece, when I hung it up on the wall finally, it affect me so viscerally? Part of it, of course, was how loaded the image is with memory of this event happening and my age at the time. But the other part of it is that I'm used to seeing images like this kind of come and go on the news so fast. With it only lasts on the screen for a few takes, but in the gallery, I'm asked to stand in front of it and consider it for a good while. I'm wondering, you as an artist spend more time with this image, and I'll cycle through some of the other works in your series for a good long time. How does that affect you, I guess, and what is that experience like for you to spend an extended time with that?
I mean, I think it's I get asked this question a lot, and honestly, I'm not thinking about it that much when I'm making it, because you're so zoomed in on, trying to put a little cotton X in the right box, translate it from like this pretty opaque map of characters, right? So it kind of loses its resolution in a way, right? It's like zooming in on an impressionist painting or something, right? I mean, it's only when you zoom out that you can see it. In some ways it gave me a long time to think about like why the impulse was to make this, because a lot of these artist talks is trying to understand why the intuition to do something, why it seemed correct, right? Why it seemed like it fit, because you don't always know the reasons, and so that's all retroactively kind of attached afterwards,
Yeah.
right? Because the intentionality is sometimes really kind of about like what feel like for me, especially like fitting an image to a medium, it's about what feels right. And I might start with the medium, like, oh, I really want to, not that happened in this case. I really want to do something counter cross stitch. I think it'd be really interesting to do something, and this is kind of before there was a lot of popular sort of programs to turn photographs into cross stitch maps.
Yeah.
So it was, it's like thinking about that. I knew that those programs existed out there. I had to hire somebody to turn it into a map for me because they didn't have, like, you couldn't go to the craft store and buy like these programs at that time. So, and then it was kind of thinking, about the way the medium sort of looked, and that this surveillance imagery is so pixelated, and the fact that it has that time code underneath, and that there was this like real distinction between the way we think about cross stitch as this sort of like, I don't know, nostalgic kind of craft thing, kind of rose in popularity in like the mid-century because it's like has a low bar of like skill associated with it. So, housewives could do their craft, but didn't really have to like take classes or like, learn something, take a long time learning a skill in order to do it. So it sort of fit in with capitalism that way. Right? You're like a few hours at night you can spend on this. And also like my mom did cross stitch growing up, and one of the things that a lot of this work is thinking about is like that so much of this imagery is we're accessing it in our domestic space, right? Which wouldn't have been the way things were even 150 years ago. So, even like early, you have to go to the cinema to see pictures of the war, right, in the early 20th century. So those things really don't come into the domestic space until the 50s or 60s, right? So that kind of thing of like looking, and there's also, I can't remember when I found out about these, but during the 1980s in Afghanistan, when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, there was a whole series of what's called war rugs, and these continued, right, into, so there's ones from the 2000s, from the US invasion, as well, of different tribes and their tribal kind of style of rug making, starting to include the objects that were invading your space, right, because of the war. So things like grenades and helicopters and tanks, and right, so they're all over. And so it was this like interesting like way of like, that was still tradition that was very much activated in a craft that was telling the story of these people's contemporary life, right? It wasn't this folk craft that was talking about the past, it was talking about their life as they lived it then. And so in many of the ways that I feel like we engage with craft now, it's like nostalgic, it's like anachronistic, like I'm gonna do this thing and it's gonna be, it's gonna look like the past in a certain way. And I'm like, how can craft actually record or tell something about what's going on now? Right.
The next series we'll talk about kind of goes further into that. I just wanted to mention this one as a quick story about the exhibition we have on right now, the Tempest Projects show. When you first came, I had asked you if you had a piece you had been wanting to show but haven't had the chance to, and the first question you asked me was, what are your fire codes like here? I thought you were kidding at the time, so I laughed it off and didn't even answer the question.
And I was like, no, seriously, what are your fire codes like?
Because this piece, and we couldn't actually exhibit the piece in the galleries without setting off alarms. So we couldn't unfortunately show the piece, but it also kind of shows before we move on that how this part of the same body of work, and it really shows kind of the diversity of your medium. And I think the next series wants to show us a bit of the same. X-ray vision versus invisibility. It pairs those cyanotypes, kind of see in the back, along with the textile that's on the floor in front of it. I guess, first of all, could you tell us a bit about how you created the work, and because the process behind how you created this had a lot to do with the ideas behind it too.
Yeah. So this body of work has several series. Actually, now I'm embarking on one right now that I'm working on. So that I think will be like the last part of it. But there is a series of cyanotypes, of which like the mural pieces are was the initial intent was to go really big, but in order to do that, I kind of like work things out small. So there's also 18 by 24 inch ones that I also show, but cyanotype allowed me to go big in a way that I couldn't really with counter cross stitch. I would be spending the rest of my life on that piece that size, or have to employ a bunch of people. So there's a cyanotype series that engages with this imagery that's coming from international borders of backscatter X-ray machines that are recording people being smuggled in trucks, essentially. Then there's a series of tintypes, which is, so cyanotype is a 19th century photographic process. It's developed in 1849 by a guy named John Herschel, who was an astronomer, who was actually trying to make red pigment, because it has iron salts in it, and it turned blue, and he found out that it was photosensitive. So it's one of the very early ways that we could actually record light on a medium, often used on paper. You've probably seen it on the cloth. So it's a very kind of material-based, like photographic process. The other photographic process in the series are these kind of smaller blocks you see on the wall, which are infrared images of people walking across the U.S.-Mexico border. In a couple of cases, they're in boats, but for the most part, walking across. And they're made in wet plate collodion, which is another early photographic process used specifically to photograph the American West, right? Kind of connects these new migrations that are happening in the American West to older migrations that happened and were recorded, right, on this same process. And what's interesting about the infrared is it already has that kind of, it already looks like a tintype. Like tintypes have this like really shiny, sort of reflective quality, and so the infrared images like kind of you kind of don't know, you think you're looking at like an old image at first, and realize in some cases there's like sites and things like that. The other series was the rug, the tapestry that was on the ground. Sorry. There we go. These tapestries, which is called ground control. And they're all large-scale tapestries. They're all made in Mexico by a group of weavers that are called the Taller Mexicano de Gobelinos in Guadalajara. And they are, this process is Gobelin top tapestry, which was brought to Mexico in the 1960s. And this same group of weavers has basically been doing it since then, and teaching their kids how to do it essentially. So it's and they exclusively work with artists, so it's not a large scale production in any way. And it was kind of select. I had seen their work and really wanted to work with them. And one of the reasons that I was interested in Gobelin tapestry is it can't be mechanized, right? It can't be, it's not computer controlled. They're totally handmade objects, which has made it basically obsolete. Like you can go to the Gobelin factory in Paris and see it done, but other than that, it's just sort of crafters super interested in it, and then there's one place in Mexico that still does it. But all of these are tapestries that are made of places on the U.S.-Mexico border that were historically places of conflict, right? So this is Mexicali, Mexico, which is the subject of a water war in California, right, the Colorado River. You can see the red, it symbolizes all of the cropland of the Imperial Valley, irrigated by the Colorado River, which then is depleted by the time it gets to Mexico, right? So by virtue of just being north of the border, the river is essentially, we're seen as entitled to that water, right? So, and then this one on the left actually shows the delta, the depletion of that delta into the Gulf of California. There's a couple other in the series. There's one at Ciudad Juarez, El Paso, where the NAFTA really created a crisis on the border there with all the maquiladoras, where women are coming in from central Mexico to work and then not getting paid very well, and so then ended up in prostitution, and there were thousands and thousands of women murdered on that border. It also has some of the most intense cartels there. And then there's one that's Brownsville and Matamoros in Texas, on the very east coast of Texas, where the Spanish-American War started. So
you, these were created in Mexico, like when, and then you had them brought back to the United States.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, which is kind of like part of interesting to me. Oh, and so they're actually made for the amount of money. Like when I negotiate with them, I'm like, the going rate for a family of four to cross the U.S.-Mexican border now is $15,000, and they're like, okay, so that will be a 2.5 meter by 3 meter tapestry, right? So like the scale is sort of determined by how much it would cost a family of four to cross that time.
All right. So the next kind of set of questions I wanted to ask about was actually about creating the work, your process. There's a lot of craft involved, of course, as we mentioned, with the cross stitch, the annotations. But I imagine that there's a part of your process that is consistent as you make art. What part of your process do you find yourself enjoying the most, kind of relishing your time in the most?
Thinking?
Just sitting there and thinking.
Is that a bad answer? I prefer to work on like objects and things that I like have to sort of struggle with in the studio. Like it's more fun for me to make things like the desks than it is to make 437 embroidered handkerchiefs. So it's like, and I honestly, I never want to say, I never want to be like those ones where it's like, I'm quitting acting, and then like, Daniel Day-Lewis like comes back 2 years,
How much of the process are you physically doing yourself?
all of the cross stitches, cross stitcheries and embroideries. So the only ones that I'm not doing are the tapestries. And there are some stained glass windows that I have that are not in this presentation, that I hired a person who repairs church windows to do. So it's like when I employ somebody, it's often it's either because like it's like an industrial process, right? That like wouldn't make sense for me to do it myself, or it's like if it's a craft process, it's like strategically like what does the person who makes this thing like add to the content of the work that I'm making, right?
Like the tapestries in the previous.
Yeah.
Is working with volunteers part of the process?
Working with what?
Volunteers.
I've never worked with volunteers. Everyone's paid, so they're all hired. I'm not particularly comfortable like asking people to do things for free.
I'm thinking of Judy Chicago.
Yeah.
Forgetting to say thank you. Which
Yeah.
Your initiative.
I don't ask people to do things for free.
Well, then do you secure the funding prior to doing these?
It has honestly all gone on the credit cards.
Well, it's good to know.
My whole, or like, it's all been self-funded for the most part. And now, that being said, like things have, fortunately, like winning the Florida prize, right? Came with like $30,000 or something. So then I can make tapestries, right? So I have gotten a few lucrative grants, like the Southern Prize, so there's like Joan Mitchell. So like those kinds of things have definitely paid, either retroactively for the money that I put down up front, but you kind of have to have, especially in sculpture, I feel like you really have to like kind of believe in what you're doing, because up front things are not cheap. And there's very few processes that are as cheap as dirt. Even ceramics isn't as cheap as dirt. It's made out of dirt. But
I had just one more question. We'll open it up to questions, of course, too. And we kind of touched on it before. I was kind of reminded of a time I interviewed one of your colleagues at USF, and I asked her about her work, trying to get a sense of the deeper meaning of her work, her sculptures and paintings. And eventually she had to just stop me and tell me, I like colors. That was the extent of it. And I realized,
can't wait to find out who that was.
that's essentially what she
It was Elizabeth Condon.
No. That's fine. Sometimes art doesn't need to justify itself beyond what it exists as.
Yeah.
On the other hand, your work is very layered and deep, and subject matter wise, it can be very heavy.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself needing to cope with it from time to time with the heaviness of that subject matter?
No, I think some people are better at brushing it off in a certain way. So I also, and part of that, I have aphantasia. So this is like there was just an essay in the New Yorker about it. So now people are going to be more educated. I was in the study that talks about it, the New Yorker. So it was very exciting. Anyway, it's an inability to see or think in images. Right, so like I close my eyes and I see the back of my eyelids. Like there's no images made, it's just darkness. So like, I do think it makes you maybe more, less susceptible to the imaginary processes that can invade with images that kind of unwillingly.
Yeah.
So. For me, it's I don't find myself as sensitive to it as other people are.
Yeah.
But because I have a colleague, Neil Bender, who is hyperphantasia, so it's like an extreme ends, like people who really can think in like full color images and like imagine the whole world. So apparently I have a great time reading novels. I've never said I liked the novel better than the movie. So I've never been disappointed by the images in the movie. But, he is incredibly sensitive to even like thinking about like horrible things, right? Whereas to me it's a real abstraction, so.
Yeah, that can make sense. How I can see how then these images kind of can exist as discrete objects, whereas I think what I do see, like the piece we have, and we'll go check out later, I think of that object and kind of imagine the before and after, and the sounds and the Okay, so I'd love to explore that further, but I'd rather open it up to questions here. We'll take the questions here, and you can take a walk through the gallery for anybody that feels like joining us for that. Go ahead.
Hi. So your work is very cerebral, very conceptual, but we're in Dunedin, Florida. Do you ever feel like you're outnumbered by the dominant cultural and aesthetic popular culture here?
Yeah, I mean, I feel out of place often. I exist in academia, so there's enough people around me. I get to take whatever classes I want in the philosophy department, and I get friends in the film department who are very interesting. So I'm surrounded by people who are very, intelligent and value intellectual pursuits. The mainstream culture in Florida tends to value things like the outdoors more than I do. I wear long sleeves through the summertime because I'm terrified of the sun. You know, I don't know. I feel like you could find your people anywhere.
How do you do that?
But
How do you do that here?
yeah, okay. I feel this is becoming an answer. I mean, much of the way I've done it is by getting involved in things like Tempest projects in Tampa and places like this, where you know people are interested in the visual arts and music and dance and things that aren't theater, things that aren't. I mean, one of my biggest like frustrations is I'm really interested in experimental theater, of which there is none really that I've found. If anybody has any. You know, and I mean like experience in theater where there's no talking. That lasts for 8 hours. So, like even in New York, it's hard to find now. You know,
Start one.
yeah. Well, I've toyed around with the idea, but I'm once again I'm not very good at collaborating. So somebody else is directing.
But it makes sense. I was interviewed about the Art Center just yesterday, and they asked me to sum up the Art Center with 3 individual words, and the first one that obviously came on was community. And that's the point of the Tempest Project show too, is to kind of show not the art, but how the art makes the community, and the community makes the art, and they're centered around places like
Yeah,
this.
I mean, one of the things that we did was started a gallery in our garage, and it was surprising like how many people who I didn't know found out about it and came to my garage to see the exhibition. And part of the reason it was in my garage is I could do anything, right? We had one artist who bought a 1980s Mercedes Benz and flipped it, you know, with 100 pounds of sequins inside. It was like, the oil was like spilling out and the lights were on. It was like, you know. So, you know, we had, people were able to take over the whole space, like, paint it whatever color, and like, didn't have to worry about the floors and that kind of thing. So part of it is like you have to be willing to kind of make your own theater, experimental theater, which I guess is kind of what I was doing, but you know, visual arts. Right.
Very cool. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, so I hope my question isn't too heavy because it's.
You haven't asked enough questions already.
So I got some folks in this crowd, but Noelle and I have worked on projects together. So since the exhibition that we had at Ratner, some more cultural things have developed as they do every day. So in terms of talking about nostalgia and as it's relating to some of these images, almost was like less than a year later we were confronted with a very shocking visually, I'll just say that, assassination of Charlie Kirk, which was instantaneously spread everywhere, right? So how do you see in your work and like going forward with something we talked about a lot, which is this increasingly surveilled world, like our relationship to it as an audience, your relationship to it as the artist? Because I feel, I don't know if it's just me, maybe it's not just me, but I think a lot of us are becoming, yes, that was shocking, but a lot of us are becoming desensitized to a lot of these things. And I look back at the boys on film and I'm just like, oh gosh, remember when that was shocking, right? So I feel like I'm doing that, and that doesn't make it okay, right? It just makes it like, where are we going? What are we doing? So how do you feel about that in your practice and as, I guess, a person and moving forward?
Yeah, so I guess there was a couple of, I feel like there's a couple of
Yes.
issues that you brought to light there. The sort of overwhelming amount of surveillance. One thing that is kind of reassuring, maybe a little too optimistic, but is that like they're not very good at it. I feel like the companies, whoever, like data surveillance, like God, I wish that Amazon would predict or like my Audible account would predict something that I actually want to listen to, but it tends to just give me things I've already bought and already listened to. You know, it's like not actually good at reading my mind. So there's, it's like there's a certain amount at which I'm skeptical of how good they are at these things. And part of that skepticism comes from when a lot of this technology was being put into airport security, which is how I came across the backscatter imagery initially. And if you do much scraping in terms of like reading like about this stuff, you realize like how much it is a performance and not terribly effective, right? There's things like obviously like the shoe ban. Like what was the purpose of taking your shoes off? I'm not really sure, but it's off now. They're thinking of like retracting the ounces of liquids you could take. I mean, a lot of it is just for show. So I tend to think that a lot of it tends to be more about an appearance than it is about any kind of actual vision.
At the Metropolitan Museum, there was initially, after 9/11, no check. And
Yeah.
people were upset and didn't want to go in the museum, so they added the check.
Somebody just stole the crown jewels out of the Louvre,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
In 7 minutes without any interference.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? It's like, a place where and it was open, right? Like there was presumably thousands of people entering the Louvre, or had already
They
entered.
didn't use a ladder. To give them credit, they didn't use a ladder. They stayed out of the way of the public, right?
They used technology that was developed 15,000 years ago. Yeah. So, and this desensitization. I don't know. There's always these things like we're being desensitized. I mean, it seems to me things are still fairly. People are still shocked by images.
Because consistently, let's just take images from World War II, for example. Like, obviously, those things are terrible. But it's this idea of having this instantaneous sort of awfulness in your face, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's the difference between it being instant and being something you see from, other than, like, that all happens in, like, the imagination.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Maybe there's this false sense of control in having it released later, in the sense that, like, if it's released instantaneously by random people on social media,
Yeah.
there's this sense of, oh, well, there's no control, it's just going everywhere, right? So, I don't know. But maybe it's rules and regulations. In America, you're not allowed to show dead people in the newspaper. You get a newspaper from South America, you guys with the first accent looking at me. So you have to understand that different cultures have different sensitivities. And also with the World War II images, we've got a lot of prejudice that you're keeping alive.
Right.
Because it has nothing to do with now, but it keeps being regurgitated as historic and as bad. So those are things you're choosing to indoctrinate people with certain images. Right, of course. I'm just.
I mean, one of the, everything is, I try to be a dialectical thinker, right? And think that, like, things have nothing's ever purely one thing or another. So, the positive side of that is that, like, it's not being packaged for you and explained to you as, like, this is what it is, right? Now, that happens very quickly afterwards. I mean, one of the things that I'm interested in using these images that are iconic, although none of my students know what the Rodney King meaning is anymore, right? They don't know who Rodney King is that it is that we rarely get to see them like de-editorialized, right? In a space where it's like you're allowed to kind of like think about it without having this sort of chatter of whatever political framework your select news network is putting over it, right? Because some of it, these are all kind of like vessels that are easily, images are just sort of, images desire a title card, right? In a way that like paintings don't, or I should say photographs have to be contextualized in a certain way. They're like a found object, right? Unless you understand the context, that found object can be anything. I mean, a good example is the sort of iconic image that was used in the civil rights era of the policeman with the police dog in, I think, Montgomery, where the dog is lunging at a black man. And that gets sent around as like, look how awful the police are, attacking protesters with the dogs. And in that actual case, he's pulling the dog away, but you don't know that from the image, right? So they're just these sort of vessels for people to fill with content in a certain way. And it is, in some ways, maybe that desensitization and that skepticism of imagery is a good thing. Because when we don't have an image associated with things, maybe we can think a little clearly about the implications or like take a breath. Like I think about, 9/11 being a good example. Like the response to 9/11 was so out of proportion, right? And I think part of that was because of the fact that everybody saw it. And the response in New York was much more measured, actually, than it was in the rest of the country, partially because they had other senses and other complicated, many people knew people, they were smelling the thing. There were other senses engaged beyond just their sense of sight. And I think there's something a bit triggering about the sense of sight in a way that is different than some of the other senses that are maybe less literalized, I don't know, but.
Is there time for one?
Yeah, we'll take one more and then we'll take a tour together, but I'd love to hear it.
Some of your images, what I notice is there's a lot of like pixelation, geometry. My brain is trained to that from my job, but anyway. So what kind of inspired you to kind of focus on those, like even your cross stitch, that's pixelated, basically it's geometry. All of the things that I noticed, even the maps that you had, the tapestry.
Yeah.
So what kind of inspiration or, what is your starting point to go in that direction?
Well, all of the images were essentially, they're all coming off the internet, right? So they're a pixelated image, right? They're a digital image. I think the Columbine surveillance cameras might have had tape, or they might have been an early digital videotape, a DV, small DV. It was tape, big tape. For sure, the Rodney King meeting was recorded on VHS tape, right? So those were an analog image. They would have been interlaced. So there's already a kind of pixelization or abstraction that happens, especially since this is the low resolution of those videos, often taken in Rodney King was a very low light situation, so it's very kind of grainy, that kind of thing. So it really does talk about this specifically a digital type of scene, which is based on pixelization that is created, and that pixelization is foregrounded by craft like counter cross stitch that has existed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right, in human culture. So that idea of making an image through this process of a grid really goes back much longer than the digital images that we have today. So it's kind of tapping into that history, right, of the grid. And then in terms of modernism, right, like all of Western imagery since the Renaissance is based on the perspectival grid, and then modernism, starts to bring that grid to the forefront in like the late 1800s, and then makes it the predominant thing in like the 1950s, right? Hard edge abstraction, you get people like, Mondrian's a little earlier than that, but like Mondrian kind of being an early version of that, and then people like Ryman and Ad Reinhardt and all these people that are really focusing on that grid as like a structuring part of our visual space.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, Noelle, and all of you. If you have further questions, please feel free to come with us. We're going to take a walk to the gallery where your work is currently at and see how it works in the context of the exhibition. I wanted to thank all of you for coming. If you end up not joining us in the gallery space, I forgot I wanted to thank Lang's Lemonade. They provided the coffee for us this morning for our coffee conversations. And to invite you to be back next month. December, we're going to have with us another artist who's exhibiting here currently. It's Yali Ilan. He has the solo exhibition in the Gamble Gallery. So he'll be here with us next month to speak for coffee conversations. But again, I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning, and welcome you to join us in the gallery.